Hey there. We are seeing emotions everywhere. People are yelling, people are crying, it's everywhere. We look at the news and there's emotions. They do something to us in the sense that they evoke emotions in us. We get to work, we're feeling emotional, lots of things are going on. Emotions are all over the place. And yes, they are all over the place, literally as well as figuratively. So, how do we and how can we express emotions in a healthy manner so that we can lower our stress levels and so that we can maintain our integrity as well as our dignity? Well, we're going to look at that and talk about it in just one moment. Oops. Hi, everybody. You are inside of Stress Talk Live with Marcyline, and I'm your host, Marcyline Bailey. I'm so glad that you joined us today because this is where we help women over 40 to live healthier lives through strategic stress management and solution focused self care. How was your week? I hope you had a wonderful week. I did. I had a great week and it ended with a bang. I attended a conference with over 400, almost, 450 social workers, which was fabulous. It's always great when social workers get together. You learn a lot about the profession, about the work, and also about each other. Before we get started with our topic for today, as always, please like, follow, and subscribe to ML Bailey Consultants on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. That's where you will find me. Also, check out my tap link. You will find resources there. You'll find links to my website as well as a sign up sheet for my newsletter. And today I've added a link, and I'll tell you about that link when we get into what we're talking about for today. Also, here's my website. You can always go there and find a little bit more about me, what I do, and how I do it. Our topic for today is 3 healthy, mindful actions to share emotions and lower stress. Why are we talking about this? Well, as you know, I've dedicated the month of April, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. I've dedicated this this month to talking about emotions. Emotions. You know, we in the Western world, meaning the United States, Europe, we don't really show our emotions in a way that is always healthy. Um, and I don't know what that's about, but I'm going to give you some impression or my thoughts about it in just a moment. But what happens when we are feeling emotions and we're not able to express it? Remember, for the last couple of weeks, I've been saying that when your emotions are active, the stress response is active as well. When your emotions are active, the stress response is active as well. And basically, what that means is that the same the same system that triggers our emotions is the very same system that triggers the stress response. And as a result, our body changes in the same way. if you recall, I gave you an example of how um, if I'm surprised, if I have a surprise birthday party and, they bring me into the room and all of a sudden everybody yells surprised and I'm overwhelmed, I'm overjoyed because it's such a sweet and wonderful thing to do. And I see all my friends and my family and it touches my heart. I become emotional. I have an emotion response. And because of that response, my stress response kicks in. My heart beats faster and harder. My muscles tense. My vascular system changes. There are major changes that occur in my body as a result of that stress response. Well, the same physical changes will occur instantaneously as well if I'm outside and I see a snake and I'm afraid of the snake and the snake is coming towards me, right? So whether I'm happy, whether I'm afraid, fearful, whether I'm surprised, whether I'm stunned, the physical response is the same. And so that's why I'm saying that when our emotions are active, so is our stress response. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 healthy, mindful actions that will help you to share your emotions. And in addition to helping you to share your emotions, um, you will also be able to lower your stress levels at the same time. So, um, so I've already talked about how it's difficult for us to share our emotions. Um, but let's talk about what an emotion is first. Okay, let's talk about that. First of all, well, let me do this. Let me talk about the difference between emotions, feelings, and mood, because we often use these terms interchangeably. So let's talk about a little bit about the differences, okay? So when I'm talking about emotion, I'm talking about data. I'm talking about information that I have taken in. It's information that my brain is processing. And usually an emotion, when we talk about an emotion, it's basically a noun. It's a person, place, or thing kind of a thing. It's an abstract entity, but we can actually name it. We can give it a name. Um, we're not. Um, it's not an action. It's a thing. But when we're experiencing an emotion, there's also a physical response. Remember, I talked about the stress response and I described some of that. Heart beats faster and harder, blood pressure goes up, your skin may become clammy, you might sweat, your extremities are strong, may become stronger because you're pumping a lot of blood to them. You're getting ready to run or fight, or in some cases you freeze, right? But there is a physical response when we experience an emotion. Also, there are universal facial expressions. We know that when someone does this, they're smiling, and they do this, they're smiling, but there's an indication that they're happy. When someone does this, they're frowning, and there's an indication that they are sad or they're frustrated. Emotions are short lived, they don't last a long time, and they're very specific. Very specific. So, what's the difference between an emotion and a feeling? Okay, so a feeling is basically a physical state or an emotional state, but it is something that we consciously state. We've consciously interpreted the emotion that we're feeling. We've consciously interpreted the emotion that we're feeling because emotions are sometimes unconscious. We can't really We don't know what we're feeling, but we're feeling something, right? So we can't describe it because we don't know what that emotion is that we are experiencing at that time. But a feeling is something that we can describe. And some people call it a verb because it's an action, it's an occurrence, it's a state of being. And that's the definition of a verb. The thing about feelings, when we are describing our feelings, how we feel, oftentimes how we feel or our interpretation of the emotion is based on history, our own history, as well as the history of those who've come before us, like our parents, our grandparents, their parents, and their grandparents. It's also based on our experience, as well as the environment in which we live or in which we've grown up in. Additionally, it can be based on our upbringing. So when we are describing our emotions and we're stating how we feel, it can be a biased interpretation of that emotion. And because it's based on all of those things that I've just mentioned. The other thing that influences how we feel, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit, is the generational pain and trauma that's been passed down our through our genes and through those from those that we love generationally, right? So when we're talking about our feelings, we have to remember that it is a conscious interpretation of an emotion, and it can be biased because it's based on a lot of different things. The emotion, however, that we experience is specific, it's short lived, and it's a physical response to a stimulus, to an unknown stimulus, or a stimulus that's known, but it's not, it could be anything. So, how do those things compare to a mood? A mood is basically the state of our mind when we look at it over a period of time. And it can be influenced by our environment, it can be influenced by our diet, whether we exercise or not, our health status, as well as our thought patterns. All of those things influence our mood. Moods can vary. They can be very strong and intense. Let me go back. Our mood can be influenced by strong and intense emotions, as well as strong and intense feelings. Again, feelings are the interpretation of the emotions that we experience. So, where am I going with all of this? I wanted you to have a sense of the difference between emotions, feelings, and mood, because I want to, as we're progressing through our topic, I want to also quickly talk about how we describe emotions. So, think about when you were younger. Did you have the leeway to describe how you were feeling? If you Many of us didn't. Many of us weren't allowed to really describe how we were feeling. Can you imagine telling your mom, I'm mad at you? Now, some kids do that now during this era. Some kids say all kinds of things to their parents. But growing up in the era that I grew up in, we weren't allowed to say certain things to our parents. And that's not a bad thing. I'm qualifying it before I say the next thing I'm about to say. That's not a bad thing. However, I think what it did, I think it helped to teach those of us who grew up in this particular time period. It taught us to suppress our emotions because we weren't allowed to use words to describe them, describe how we felt, describe what this feeling was that was inside of us that we felt maybe intensely. I remember a situation where I made some statements to my brother and my cousins, and it was nasty. I've said some really mean things to them, and I got in trouble for it. I got in trouble for it. No one asked me why I said it. I said it because they were laughing at me and they were making fun of me. But no one asked me, none of the adults asked me why I felt, why I said what I said. And no one asked me what I was feeling when I said it. And no one asked me what had happened as a precursor to all of that. The result was I got in trouble. I was told to never say it again. And I learned not to say it, but I also learned to keep things to myself. I think it's happens all the time, right? It happens all the time. But in the era in which I was raised, that's how parents raised their children. They could not say certain things. So because it was viewed as disrespect. If I said to my mother, "I'm mad at you," that would be disrespectful. And I couldn't say that. I couldn't say I'm angry because that was not allowed because it was disrespectful. And I know other people my age range for whom that was true. The other thing is describing our emotions were, in terms of describing emotions, it wasn't modeled in front of us. It was not something that older people taught us to do by modeling, because either they suppressed it and then they blew up, or they just didn't express it at all. Now, have you seen people who are like seethe? They seethe. They're like, they're moving their hands, or they're, sitting like that, brooding, or standing like that, brooding. It's because they are experiencing an emotion and they're not able to express it in a healthy way. So again, we weren't taught to express our emotions. It wasn't modeled in front of us. And if we did, we were viewed as being disrespectful, or we got in trouble for it. Another example just came to me. I remember crying. I was hurt. I was playing with friends at their house, and I started crying because I got hurt. I got hit in the eye, and I started crying. And my friend's mother made me come in the house, and I had to stand in the corner. Dropping that right there. This is a woman I love. This is a woman who took care of us, who saw about us, she was a loving woman. But when I cried, she made me come in the house, had to stop playing. I had to stand in the corner because I cried. I learned not to cry at her house. That's what I learned. It didn't stop me from crying because I'm a crier. But I learned not to cry at her house. And I remember she talked to my grandmother. When my grandmother came home from work, she talked to my grandmother and explained to her why I was in the corner. I was being punished for being sensitive. Isn't that something? The other thing I wanted to share about how we express emotions. When you talk to a child and you say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Children always say, "I'm good, I'm bad." That's not very descriptive. We too, as adults, do not always use descriptive words to describe our emotions or our feelings. We say, I'm all right. Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, good. But we don't use descriptive words. We don't talk, we don't, it's like we can't pull out a list of vocabulary, emotional vocabulary words that we can reference when needed. But we do need those words, right? We do. We do need to be able to say more than I'm good or I'm all right, or we need to be able to say it and we need to feel comfortable saying so. The third thing that I'd like to talk about in terms of describing emotions is that when we are not allowed, when we don't have the words, when we don't have the vocabulary to express our emotions and our feelings, when we have not seen it modeled in a healthy way before us, when we were not allowed to express fully our emotions or our feelings, it contributed to the suppression. And that is habit forming. That's a habit. When we suppress our emotions, it's a habit. So how can we get out of this? What can we do to get away from the what can we do to get away from the what happens to us when we are trying to describe how we feel? Well, I'm going to share with you a framework for doing so. And I have a PowerPoint. Well, it's not a PowerPoint, it's really slides that I'm going to share with you. So if you'll just give me just a moment, I'm going to pull it up. There we go. Voila. There it is. Okay, so this is I'm calling it a framework, but it's how we can share. It's a process that we can use to share our emotions and lower our stress levels. And it's adapted from The Language of Emotions, a book by Carla McLaren. And you can find this book on the Sounds True website. I also have a link on my tap link that you can go to, that you can go to and take a look at that. Take a look at the book. But I want to share this with you because I think it's a powerful um, it's a powerful tool. So the first thing that happens before we experience emotions, and this is Carla McLaren's framework. This is her process. And I've added some things to it, and I'll tell you what I've added to it. So it's an adaptation. But when we experience an emotion, it's because we have been exposed to a stimulus. Something has happened. We've seen something, heard something, tasted something, smelled something, experienced something that causes us to experience an emotion. So that's the first thing that happens to us. When we experience the stimulus, that stimulus occurs, we experience the emotion and then we interpret that feeling that we are experiencing. I shared with you earlier that if I see a snake outside, it's going to frighten me. So my feeling is I feel frightened because I can feel the tenseness in my body and I'm ready to run. So there's a stimulus, we experience an emotion, and then there's a feeling that we can describe that expresses the emotion that we're feeling. But what happens once you feel that emotion? What happens when you've you've decided or you can explain what the feeling is that you're experiencing. What McLaren says is that before we act, we need to pause. There needs to be a gap that prevents us from just jumping. You know, before we look, we need, instead of leaping before we look. This is a mindfulness. Activity to pause, to have a gap between something. It's something that we teach. So, what I will suggest to you, instead of jumping to the next step, you want to take a pause. So, how do you do that? First of all, you take a deep breath. Breathing is the best way to calm yourself when you are feeling anxious, scared, or fearful. It is also the best way to initiate the relaxation response. The relaxation response is the opposite of the stress response. So it's important that once you experience the stimulus and you can describe the feeling or express the feeling that you are experiencing, you want to make sure that you are breathing. When we when we are in a moment, we tend not to breathe, or our breathing becomes very shallow. That's part of the stress response. We want to initiate the relaxation response. So we want to breathe. Breathing is where you are pausing. It will help you to pause, and it will help you. It fills the brackets here. You want to breathe. So once you're breathing, you experience the stimulus, you can describe the feeling, you are breathing, your stress level is coming down. The next step is to name the emotion. Actually name it. Do it out loud, do it in your head. And this comes from research by Matthew Lieberman, who was at UCLA. What he found is that when we actually name what we're feeling, name the emotion that we are feeling, it lowers our stress levels. I think I alluded to this in a previous episode of Stress Talk Live. So we want to be able to name that feeling, name the emotion, and name the feeling. I feel anxious. I feel angry. I feel fearful. I feel happy. I feel sad. I feel frustrated. Okay, we want to name it. So, the first 4 steps of the process that will help you to express your emotions and lower your stress level. You experience a stimulus, you experience a feeling that you have consciously described. You're going to breathe. You're going to breathe. You're going to take a few moments to breathe, which initiates the relaxation response. And then you can name the emotion, because that emotion will also lower your stress level. What's the next thing you're going to do? After you name it, you need to take a pause again, because oftentimes before, when we feel something, and especially if it's an intense emotion or an intense feeling, we just we act. This process helps you to slow it down. So once you've named it, I'm frustrated, I'm elated, I'm excited. Once you've named that emotion and the feeling, you're going to pause again. And this pause is to help you or to prevent you from adding to, adding your thoughts, adding your subjective assumptions, adding unnecessary accusations, your vain imaginings, right? Your daydreams. It prevents that because in this bracket again, you're just going to pause and you're going to breathe. Again, this is an opportunity to practice mindfulness. You're just breathing. And if you have a thought, you acknowledge it and you let it go. Okay? So you're breathing here, you're avoiding assumptions, you're avoiding accusations, avoiding what I call vain imaginings, avoiding adding anything subjectively that is not helpful to the situation. You want to avoid that. Instead, you want to be curious. So this bracket, you're breathing, you're you're thinking, but you're not holding on to those thoughts, and you're curious. You're adding curiosity to the mix. Why curiosity? Because when we are curious, we can clarify what has happened. The next step. Once you've gone through that process where you've experienced the stimulus, you're feeling, you can describe it because you've consciously interpreted it. You're breathing here. You're breathing to lower your stress level and to deactivate the stress response, to kick in the relaxation response. You name the emotion and the feeling. This also, as the researcher discovered, lowers your stress level. And then here, you continue to breathe. You are acknowledging thoughts, but you do not hold on to them. You're letting them go, and you initiate your curiosity. The next step is you can choose to act or not. At this point, you can choose whether you're going to take action or whether you're not going to take action. Because you should be in a frame of mind whereby the emotion is not carrying you away like an ocean wave. You're able to stand and think clearly and make a clear decision as to whether you should take action or whether you should let it go. Okay? Or what degree of action you should take. It allows space and time for you to do what is healthy. What is healthy? And then here is the book, The Language of Emotions. Again, it's by Carla McLaren. She's a researcher as well as a consultant. And again, it's a great, if you're having difficulty expressing your emotions and your feelings, this is a great resource for you to use. The Language of Emotions. Okay. So we have just gone over 3 healthy mindful actions to share emotions and lower stress. And what are those 3 healthy actions? First, knowing the difference between emotions, feelings, and mood. Knowing what we're talking about, right? The second is describing the emotion, not being fearful to express your emotions because you are learning how to express them in a healthy way. We've been taught not to express them, but we can express them in a healthy way. And then finally, the third is practicing the framework that I've just shared that is healthy and that will help you to also lower your stress response. And you can find that resource in the book, The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. Ooh, well, that's all for now. I'm so glad that you joined me today on Stress Talk Live with Marcyline. We're going to finish out the month next week, continuing to talk about our emotions. I may even do a recap. I think that because we've talked about quite a bit, I'll do a recap maybe this week. Next week, look for our Stress Talk Live in print to come out. And make sure you listen to the podcast on everywhere. Wherever you get your podcast, you'll find the podcast, Stress Talk with Marcyline. That's all for now. I wish you well. Take good care.